My name is Sienna Blake, and I was 17 years old the night my silence helped kill my best friend. I wish I could say my story begins with something soft and cinematic, sunset over a football field, car radios humming in the background, the kind of golden teenage moment people post on social media with nostalgic captions. But it doesn't. It begins with oil-stained hands, fluorescent lights, and a boy who was never supposed to fall. Connor Mills and I had been inseparable since middle school. He was the genius. I was the girl who knew how to pull an engine apart and put it back together, but needed a calculator for basic algebra. We were the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences, who knew each other's secrets, who could tell by a single text message when the other was having a bad day. Connor was heading to MIT on a full scholarship. I was planning on community college and working more shifts at my dad's auto shop. People like to joke that the future rocket scientist and the mechanic's daughter made an unlikely pair. But it worked. He kept me from flunking physics. I kept him from walking into social landmines with the kind of arrogance smart kids sometimes carry without meaning to. We met in 7th grade when Connor transferred from a private school after his dad lost his job. The other kids made fun of his thrift store clothes and generic sneakers. I saw something different. The boy who could solve calculus problems in his head and built robots out of junked electronics I brought from the shop. By senior year at Westfield High, Connor had become academic royalty, valedictorian material, student body treasurer, captain of the academic decathlon team. Teachers adored him. College recruiters called the house. So often his mom started letting them go to voicemail. MIT had been courting him since sophomore year. I was proud of him. Honestly, I was. I never felt jealous because Connor never made me feel small for choosing a different path. When people asked why the future MIT golden boy hung around a girl who spent half her time smelling like motor oil, Connor just shrugged and said, "She's got the most important quality. She's real." Our physics teacher, Mr. Garrett, was one of those educators everybody loved. He made science feel like magic tricks instead of torture. He stayed after school to help kids who were struggling and coached the academic decathlon team like it was the Olympics. Connor idolized him. I did too, in my own way. So when Mr. Garrett pulled Connor aside after class one day and offered him a paid position helping with his private tutoring business, it felt like the universe finally giving my best friend a break. "This could pay for my textbooks," Connor told me, eyes shining as we walked down the hallway. "Plus, imagine the recommendation letter. From Mr. Garrett, MIT will eat it up." I forced a smile and nudged his arm. "Look at you, future engineer. Just don't forget about us peasants when you're designing bridges and spaceships." He laughed, but there was a jittery edge to it I didn't know how to name back then. It started small. Mr. Garrett would call Connor out of other classes for urgent tutoring matters. Connor began staying late 3 nights a week, missing our usual hangouts at the diner or the garage. When I asked what he was doing for Mr. Garrett, his answers were vague. Administrative stuff, organizing files, helping set up his home office, normal tutor stuff. But Connor's definition of normal started to worry me. He was jumpier, always checking his phone like it might explode. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He snapped at innocent questions and apologized immediately after, like he was terrified of losing control of even a single moment. "You okay?" I asked one afternoon at lunch, watching him pick at his food like it might bite back. "You've been off." "Just senior year pressure." He didn't look at me when he said it. "MIT expects perfection. No room for mistakes." The way he said mistakes made my stomach twist, but I let it go. I told myself everyone was stressed. College decisions, finals, scholarships. It was a pressure cooker for all of us. 2 weeks later, I learned how wrong I was. I had forgotten my calculus book in Mr. Garrett's classroom and went back after football practice to grab it. The hallway was quiet, the kind of eerie silence that makes your footsteps sound too loud. Most of the lights were off, leaving pockets of shadow between the doorways. As I got closer to the physics room, I heard voices inside. "I won't do it anymore." Connor's voice, thin and shaking. "This isn't what you said tutoring would be." "You're overreacting," Mr. Garrett replied, calm, patient, the way he sounded when explaining complex formulas. "This is how mentorship works in the real world. You want that MIT recommendation, don't you?" Something cold slid down my spine. I moved closer, pressing myself against the wall beside the door. It was cracked open an inch. "I'm not comfortable with this," Connor said. The things I'm asking you to do are perfectly normal, Mr. Garrett cut in, unless you want me to tell the administration about those test answers you supposedly found in my desk drawer. My heart slammed against my ribs. Connor had never cheated on anything in his life. I never took any test answers, he choked out. You know that. Do I? Mr. Garrett's voice turned sharper. Because I have security footage that says otherwise. Funny how cameras can be interpreted different ways. Through the narrow gap, I could see Mr. Garrett standing too close. Connor pressed back against the whiteboard. Mr. Garrett's hand rested on Connor's shoulder, fingers digging in, just a little too hard, in a way that made my skin crawl. Your scholarship depends on that perfect GPA, Mr. Garrett murmured. One academic dishonesty charge and MIT disappears. Your whole future gone, unless we continue our special arrangement. I can't keep coming to your house, Connor whispered. If my parents find out, they won't, Mr. Garrett snapped, unless you make them suspicious. You're a smart boy, Connor, smart enough to understand what's at stake here. That was the moment I should have pushed the door open, should have walked in, pulled out my phone, recorded everything. Should have done anything other than what I did. Instead, my hand shook on the doorknob and I let go. I backed away, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my teeth. I grabbed my calculus book from my locker and ran out of the building like the floor was on fire. All night, I replayed what I'd seen. Mr. Garrett's hand on Connor's shoulder. Special arrangement. The threats. The security footage. Every version of the story that made sense ended in one ugly conclusion. Our favorite teacher was a predator, and my best friend was trapped. But Mr. Garrett was married. He had 2 young daughters. He coached Little League. He'd won Teacher of the Year 3 times. He was the kind of man parents trusted with their kids' futures. So I did what scared people do best. I convinced myself I'd misunderstood. 3 weeks later, I watched Connor get led out of our school in handcuffs, and every excuse I'd made for my silence shattered. Did you hear? Someone whispered beside me as police cars lit up the parking lot. Connor Mills got caught stealing test answers from Mr. Garrett's office. Test answers. Exactly what Mr. Garrett had threatened. I stood there, frozen, while my best friend's life burned down in front of me. And I hadn't even opened my mouth to scream. The rumors spread faster than the sirens faded. By last period, everyone at Westfield High knew some version of the story. Honor student, test answers. Mr. Garrett's office. By the next morning, there were local news vans outside the school. Connor's mugshot was all over social media, his face hollow, eyes empty, like someone had taken the light out of him and left the shell behind. 3 days later, there was a disciplinary hearing. I sat in the back row of the conference room, my hands cold and slick with sweat. The walls were covered in framed photos of smiling students and state championship trophies, like the building itself was mocking what was about to happen inside it. Connor sat at the front with his parents. His mom's eyes were swollen and raw from crying. His dad stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles jumping. They had poured everything into his future. Extra shifts, second jobs, late-night study sessions. At the other table sat Mr. Garrett in a pressed shirt and neat tie, flanked by a lawyer. He looked somber, wounded, like this was harder on him than anyone else. The principal cleared her throat. We're here to address the allegations of academic dishonesty against student Connor Mills. They played the security footage on a big screen. Connor, entering Mr. Garrett's office at 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the same night he'd stayed late for tutoring. The camera didn't show what happened inside the office, only him going in and out. Mr. Garrett shook his head sadly. I'm disappointed, he said when it was his turn to speak. Connor was struggling financially, and I think the pressure got to him. I offered him tutoring work, tried to help, but apparently it wasn't enough. He dabbed his eyes with a tissue. It was a perfect performance. Concerned teacher, betrayed mentor, man who did everything right and still got hurt. Then they presented the physical evidence. Test answer keys found in Connor's backpack, handwritten copies in his own neat script. My stomach knotted. I remembered what Connor had told me in his room later, that Mr. Garrett had made him copy practice answers months ago, called it tutor prep, and then kept them as insurance. At the hearing, that context didn't exist. It just looked like cheating. When Connor finally spoke, his voice shook. Mr. Garrett planted that evidence. He's been blackmailing me for months, making me go to his house when his wife is gone, making me... Objection, Garrett's lawyer snapped. These are wild accusations against a respected educator. He's trying to deflect blame. The hearing officer's expression hardened. Mr. Mills, unless you have concrete proof, these claims will only make this worse for you. He said he had pictures, Connor insisted. Videos. He told me if I didn't do what he wanted. That's enough, the officer interrupted. We are here to discuss academic dishonesty, not unsubstantiated character attacks. Every adult at that table chose the version of reality that was easier to live with, the one where the bright student cracked under pressure, cheated, and lied to cover it up. The one where the beloved teacher was the victim. I could have changed that. I could have stood up and said I'd been outside that classroom door, that I'd heard the threats, that I'd seen Mr. Garrett's hand on Connor's shoulder and watched my best friend look like a trapped animal. Instead, I sat there, silent, fingers digging into my knees so hard I left half moon marks on my skin, but my voice stayed buried in my throat. The meeting lasted less than 2 hours. The verdict came back. Guilty. Connor was suspended, his academic record tainted, his case flagged to MIT. Within days, his scholarship was rescinded. Due to concerns regarding academic integrity, the letter said. 5 years of perfect grades and state championships erased by a few printed paragraphs. I found him behind the gym that night, sitting on the concrete with the MIT letter crumpled in his hands. 5 years, he said, not looking at me. 5 years of doing everything right. For what? Connor. He told me this would happen, Connor whispered. He said one accusation of cheating and I'd never escape, that nobody would believe me. He was right. I sat beside him, the smell of damp grass and asphalt thick in the air. We can still tell someone, the police, a lawyer, your parents. With what? He laughed, a sharp, broken sound. He has photos, videos, fake evidence, and now I'm the kid who cheated. I'm exactly who he needs me to be. I reached for his arm, but he pulled away. His eyes were red and wild and empty all at once. There has to be something we can do, I insisted, desperate. We'll find a way out. You don't get it, Sienna, he shook his head. He won. Game over. He stood up and walked away into the dark, leaving me sitting there with nothing but my useless promises and the echo of his footsteps. The next morning he wasn't at school, or the day after that. His mom called in, said he was too sick to come. I knew better. On Thursday, I drove to his house. His mom answered the door, eyes raw and voice thin. He won't come out of his room, she said. He won't eat. He won't talk to us. I don't know what to do. I asked if I could try. She led me to his bedroom door. I knocked. Connor, it's me. Go away. I'm not leaving until you open this door. After a long pause, the lock clicked. He opened it just enough for me to see his face. He looked like a ghost, pale, exhausted, pupils blown wide with terror and sleeplessness. What do you want? To help. You can't, he whispered. No one can. His room looked like a storm had ripped through it. Clothes everywhere, papers scattered. His MIT acceptance letter shredded on the floor. We sat on his bed in silence for a long time before the words finally spilled out. It started in September, he said quietly. He asked me to help set up his home office. Said he'd pay me. I thought it was filing, organizing, normal stuff. It wasn't. In halting fragments, he described how it escalated, how the boundaries blurred, how Mr. Garrett used his financial desperation and dreams as leverage, how every favor led to another, and every refusal was met with a new threat. You should have told someone, I said, though even as I said it, I knew why he hadn't. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture, test answers written in his handwriting. He made me copy these months ago, Connor said it was practice for tutoring, insurance, he called it. Now they're evidence. My stomach dropped. Mr. Garrett hadn't just trapped him. He'd built the cage piece by piece. We'll figure this out, I promised, because it was the only thing I knew how to say. We'll go to someone. We'll make them listen. Connor shook his head without looking at me. Even if they did, those photos still exist. Those videos. He can still ruin me, my family, everything. That was Friday afternoon. On Saturday morning, they found him. He'd taken an entire bottle of his mom's prescription sleeping pills. The note he left behind was short. I'm sorry I let everyone down. I'm not who you thought I was. Even in death, he was protecting the man who had destroyed him. The church was packed for his funeral. 300 people, maybe more. Teachers, classmates, neighbors who'd watched him grow up. I sat in the back pew, my hands clenched around a tissue I never used. Mr. Garrett stood at the front in a dark suit and delivered a eulogy about second chances and academic pressure. About how Connor was more than his worst mistake, how the system put too much weight on perfection. He called my best friend a tragedy of bad decisions. Everyone nodded, dabbing their eyes, seeing a caring teacher mourning a lost student. I saw a murderer performing grief. After the service, Connor's mom found me. Her eyes were ringed in red, her voice frayed. "You were his best friend," she said quietly. "Did he ever say anything to you about why he would steal those test answers? It just doesn't make sense." Her gaze searched my face like I was holding the key to a locked door. I could have opened it. I could have told her everything. That her son had been systematically broken by someone she trusted. That I'd heard enough to know he was telling the truth. That I'd done nothing. "No," I lied. "I had no idea." The lie burned all the way down. I told myself it was kinder than the truth. That knowing her son had been abused and that I'd watched it happen might kill her all over again. But really, I was protecting myself. That night, I lay awake hearing Connor's voice over and over. Some things you just have to survive. He hadn't. For the next 2 years, I carried my silence like a stone in my chest. I graduated. I started working full-time at Dad's shop. I tried to pretend Connor's death wasn't my fault, that there was nothing I could have done. But every time I drove past the school and saw Mr. Garrett in his classroom, teaching new students, laughing with teenage boys who looked a lot like Connor had at 16, I knew better. He hadn't stopped. He was still there, and the one person who could have exposed him when it mattered most had chosen to stay silent. 2 years passed. I didn't grow out of the guilt. I grew around it, like a tree bending itself around rusted metal fused into its trunk. I worked long shifts at my dad's auto shop, pretending that grease under my fingernails and exhaustion in my bones were enough to drown the memories. They weren't. Every time I drove past Westfield High and saw Mr. Garrett through a classroom window, laughing, teaching, touching a student's shoulder the way he once touched Connor's, the guilt rose up like nausea. I kept telling myself I had no proof, that it was too late, that speaking up now wouldn't bring Connor back. And then one morning it happened. I was eating cereal at the kitchen counter when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Local teacher arrested in student abuse scandal. The headline punched the air out of me. Below it was Mr. Garrett's photo, the same mild-mannered smile he wore at Connor's funeral. I clicked the article with shaking hands. Multiple former students. 15 years of grooming and coercion. Evidence seized from his home. Testimonies that mirrored every detail of what Connor had once whispered to me. Then one line made my vision blur. Investigators are reopening the case of former student Connor Mills, who died by suicide shortly after a cheating scandal that may have been fabricated. My spoon clattered onto the counter. The room felt too small, too quiet, too late. I grabbed my keys. I drove to the district attorney's office without thinking. My body moved on instinct, the kind that finally realized silence had killed someone and was about to kill others if I didn't stop it. Inside, I asked to speak with the prosecutor handling the Garrett case. After a long wait, a woman with sharp eyes and a posture that radiated authority walked into the room. "Assistant District Attorney Michelle Rodriguez," she said. "You said it's urgent?" I swallowed hard. I have information about Mr. Garrett." She lowered herself into the chair across from me, studying my face. "What kind of information?" And then the dam broke. I told her everything. The argument I overheard. The threats, the blackmail, the hand on Connor's shoulder, the fear in his voice, the night I ran instead of helping. Michelle listened silently, her brows tightening with every detail. When I finished, she leaned back. "You're telling me you witnessed blackmail and coercion 2 years ago and didn't report it?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I was 17. I didn't know what to do." Her answer was precise and brutal. "A boy died because of your silence, and multiple others continued to be abused." The words nearly gutted me, but they were true. "I know," I said, "and I'm ready to testify. I don't care what people say about me. Connor deserves the truth." Ida Rodriguez held my gaze for a long, heavy moment. "Your testimony will be crucial," she finally said. "But understand, the defense will destroy your credibility. They'll paint you as someone trying to absolve your guilt by blaming their client." "I don't care," I whispered. "I'm done being silent." The trial began months later. The courthouse buzzed with reporters, parents, former students, people who once adored Mr. Garrett and people who feared him. When I walked into the courtroom, I could feel dozens of eyes on me, whispering, wondering, judging. On the witness stand, my hands trembled, but my voice didn't. I told the story I should have told 2 years earlier. I described Connor's fear, the confrontation, the threats. I described Mr. Garrett's tactics, every manipulative pattern that matched the testimonies of other victims. When the defense lawyer stood for cross-examination, he smiled like he'd already won. "Miss Blake," he began, "isn't it true you've struggled with guilt over your friend's death?" "Yes. And isn't it true that accusing my client helps you feel less responsible?" "No," I said firmly. "Accusing your client helps make sure he can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt Connor." The room went still. Even the judge lifted her eyes. My testimony wasn't the strongest, but it was the missing piece. The crack in the armor. The match tossed into the pile of evidence already stacked against him. Then came the sentencing. 15 victims spoke. Boys as young as 14. Years of fear, shame, and stolen futures. When it was my turn, the judge looked at me with piercing seriousness. "Your silence enabled Mr. Garrett to continue harming children," she said. "While you were young and frightened, your choice had devastating consequences." I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. I didn't argue, because she was right. Mr. Garrett was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. As they led him away in handcuffs, he glanced back, just once, not at the judge, not at the victims, but at me. A cold, calculating look, a warning or a memory, I will never know. After the trial, I tried returning to the auto shop, tried returning to the girl I was before Connor died, but everything felt wrong. Too small, too quiet, too safe. I couldn't unhear the testimonies, couldn't unsee the young boys shaking on the stand, couldn't unknow that there were countless other Connors in the world waiting for someone to speak up. So I did something no one expected. I applied to college, majored in social work. The first semester was brutal. I wasn't naturally academic the way Connor had been, but I pushed through every late-night study session, every paper, every exam. On the nights I wanted to quit, and there were many, I reminded myself that Connor hadn't gotten the chance to try. My boyfriend Jordan was the one steady thing in my life. Kind, warm, patient. But even he struggled to understand the darkness I carried. Sometimes he'd reach for me at night, and I'd flinch, lost in memories of what Connor had endured. His ex-girlfriend, Chloe, once told him he was emotionally unavailable. I wondered if she'd say the same about me, except in my case, I wasn't unavailable. I was drowning. One evening during my junior year, everything changed. I was volunteering at a teen crisis hotline when I got a call from a boy named Trevor. 16, voice shaking. My coach, he says I have to come to his house, says if I don't, I lose my spot on the team. My heart stopped. Connor. It was Connor all over again. "Trevor," I whispered, gripping the phone. "You're not alone. I believe you." "Why?" he asked. "I haven't told anyone else." Because I once knew a boy who thought no one would believe him. And he was right. Because I refused to let another kid die while I stayed silent. Instead, I said, because what you're describing is abuse, and I'm going to help you through this. For 2 hours, I guided him through safety planning, documentation, resources, and when he asked me to stay on the line until he felt safe enough to sleep, I did. 3 days later, he called back. He had recorded his coach threatening him. We reported it. His coach was arrested. Other boys came forward. Trevor lived. Connor hadn't. And that night, I made myself a promise. I would never be silent again. Trevor's case didn't just change him, it changed me. Seeing him survive what Connor never did cracked something open in my chest. A wound, yes, but also a doorway. For the first time in years, my guilt wasn't paralyzing me. It was fueling me. I doubled my work at the crisis hotline. I took every training course I could find on child protection, trauma, and abuse prevention. I studied grooming patterns until I could recognize them in my sleep. I volunteered at shelters, shadowed investigators, and sat with kids through interviews that would haunt me forever. I met Amanda, whose stepfather threatened to hurt her little brother if she told anyone what he did to her. Marcus, who'd been manipulated by his coach into thinking the abuse was just experimentation. Destiny, whose mother's boyfriend was trafficking her to his friends while telling her she was helping the family. Each child carried a story that made my heart seize, and each time I saw Connor's face in their fear. The guilt never went away, but it sharpened into purpose. Then came the burnout. There were nights I drove home from the crisis center too numb to cry. Nights I drank enough to fall asleep without hearing Connor's voice saying, "Some things you just have to survive." My relationship with Jordan cracked under the pressure. He tried. God, he tried. But loving someone who carries ghosts is like holding a moving blade. One night, after I'd canceled dinner for the third week in a row because a hotline emergency ran long, he said softly, "Sienna, I feel like I lost you to something I can't compete with." I didn't know how to tell him he was competing with the dead, with my failure, with a promise I'd made at a graveside I still couldn't bring myself to visit. We drifted. We fought. Then we drifted more. Eventually, he packed a box of his things, left it by the door, and whispered, "I hope you find peace in this. I really do." His ex-girlfriend, Chloe, had once accused him of being distant, but it was me who'd turned our home into a battlefield of unspoken grief. Still, I loved him. He loved me. But sometimes love is a casualty of purpose. By the time I graduated, I already knew what I wanted to build. Something bigger than a hotline, bigger than a single crisis center. A place where kids could speak up before it was too late. A place Connor would have needed. So I created Speak Up. It started in my tiny apartment with 3 volunteers and a secondhand laptop. But word spread through schools, churches, community centers, social workers. Soon, kids were calling us from all over the state. Teachers asked for training. Parents begged for resources. Former victims came offering to help. Within 3 years, we had a full staff of trained counselors, volunteer advocates, legal coordinators, a crisis safe house, partnerships with law enforcement and social workers, training programs for educators. We testified at legislative hearings. We pushed for mandatory abuse recognition training for teachers. We fought for better reporting systems and better protections for kids whose abusers were authority figures. And every morning when I walked into the Speak Up office, I passed a framed photo of Connor in his academic decathlon uniform, smiling, holding his trophy. Below it was a plaque with our unofficial motto, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." I'd been that good person doing nothing once. I refused to ever be her again. On the 10th anniversary of Connor's death, I finally forced myself to visit his grave. The cemetery was quiet, the late afternoon sun painting gold across the headstones. His parents had kept his resting place immaculate, flowers, stones, photos, all arranged lovingly. I knelt beside the stone that read, "Connor Mills, 1995, 2013, beloved son and friend." My throat tightened, all the things I should have said years ago pressed up through my ribs. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't save you. I'm sorry I let fear control me. I'm sorry your death was the price of my silence." The wind moved through the oak tree above us like a quiet exhale. For a moment, I felt like he was there, not forgiving me, but reminding me of the promise I was supposed to keep. As I stood to leave, I saw a woman walking toward me, early 30s, holding white roses. "Are you here for Connor?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said. I was his best friend." She nodded. "I'm Melissa. I was one of Mr. Garrett's victims." My breath hitched. She knelt and placed the roses carefully. "I come here sometimes to thank him," she said softly. "Thank him?" She nodded. "When I read about his death and what happened to him, it made me realize I wasn't alone. It gave me the courage to come forward." Her voice trembled. But I also learned something else. Someone testified later. Someone who'd stayed silent at first. I froze. Words caught like thorns in my throat. "Was that you?" I nodded, shame burning my cheeks. "Yes." She studied me carefully. "For a long time. I hated you." I closed my eyes. I deserved that. "But then," she continued softly, "I learned about Speak Up, about the kids you've helped, the policies you've changed, the predators you've stopped." When I looked at her, her eyes were full of something unexpected. Not forgiveness, but recognition, understanding. "I'm not saying it makes up for your silence, she said. "Nothing can bring Connor back. Nothing can erase what happened to the rest of us. But you turned your guilt into something that protects thousands of children. And that matters." We stood there in silence for a long time, 2 people shaped by the same monster, carrying different wounds, but walking the same path of rebuilding. When she finally left, I sat by Connor's headstone until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the grass. I thought about the boy he had been, the man he never got to become, the bridges he would have built, the kids he might have inspired, the family he might have raised. And I thought about the question that had haunted me for a decade. When did staying silent cost me more than speaking up would have? But now I knew the real question. Have I done enough with the years Connor never got to live? I'm still working on the answer. I may never find it. But I know this. I will never stay silent again. Not for anyone. Not under any circumstances. Because I have seen the cost of silence, and the price is always too high.